Jack's tumbler didn't have time for dramatic speeches. He was too busy trying not to get his leg torn off by a Glorkin patrol drone. "Step lively, folks," he called out, ducking under a low-hanging pipe that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the galaxy was young. "Lively's not a word I'd use to describe this place," chimed in Marnie, their engineer, whose idea of a good time involved recalibrating engines and telling people why they were wrong. "More like a death trap with a nostalgic charm. Charming like a punch to the face," Jax muttered as he adjusted the settings on his blaster. The gun was older than he was, which said something about both its durability and his questionable choices. Their mission, in the dubious wisdom bestowed by the universe, was to infiltrate a Glorkin black market depot. The Glorkins were known for their love of two things: profit and making sure no one else got to enjoy any. They had security measures so advanced they'd make a paranoid accountant blush. "I can't wait to meet these Glorkins," said Finn, their resident hacker, and a man whose social skills were rivaled only by his ability to fry any electronic device within a 2-mile radius. "I've heard they're real conversationalists." "Oh yeah," Jax replied, "real charmers. Like a blender with a personality disorder." They crouched behind a rusted-out cargo container, and Jax took stock of his team. Marnie, with her spiky hair and perpetual scowl, was huddled over her toolkit, adjusting something that looked suspiciously like a bomb. Finn was tapping furiously at his wrist console, his eyes darting like a mouse on caffeine. And then there was Lena, the team's muscle, whose approach to conflict resolution usually involved breaking things. "So, what's the plan once we're in there?" Lena asked, cracking her knuckles in a way that suggested she was hoping diplomacy involved throwing someone through a wall. "Simple," Jax said. "Get in, grab the goods, get out. Try not to leave too many bits of ourselves behind." "Sounds foolproof," Marnie commented dryly. "Almost like it was designed by fools." Jax grinned. "Exactly. The Glorkins won't be expecting stupidity. It's our secret weapon." Finn rolled his eyes. "Just remember, if we get caught, I'm blaming you." "You mean, when we get caught," Lena corrected. "Optimism, Lena," Jax said, checking his blaster again. "It's what gets us through these little adventures." With the kind of grace only born from desperation, they slipped through the shadows, moving closer to the depot. The place loomed like a monument to bad decisions, all angular metal and ominous hums. Jax could see the Glorkin guards patrolling, their movements precise and mechanical, like they were born for this. "I'd say they're overcompensating for something," Marnie whispered, nodding toward a particularly large guard with an even larger gun. "Probably their lack of a sense of humor," Finn suggested. Jack signaled for silence as they reached the perimeter fence, which hummed with the kind of energy that would leave a cooked corpse in its wake. "Finn, you're up." Finn crouched down, his fingers dancing over the console like a concert pianist on speed. "Just a second," he murmured, his concentration absolute. A moment later, the hum died away, the fence as harmless as Jax's old blaster on a bad day. "I'd say that was easy," Finn said, standing up, "but I wouldn't want to jinx it." "Trust me, it's already jinxed," Marnie said. "I can feel it in my bones." "Then let's not waste the jinx," Jax replied, moving forward. They slipped through the gap in the fence and into the heart of the depot. The air inside was thick with the smell of metal and unwashed aliens, which was a combination Jax could do without. "What do you think they do for fun around here?" Lena asked, her voice tinged with amusement. "Probably count all the ways they can kill us," Jax said. "Or listen to Glorkin folk tunes," Finn added. "Which, I've heard, is basically the same thing." They moved through the maze-like corridors, each turn revealing more of the depot's secrets. A cache of plasma rifles here, a pile of what looked suspiciously like stolen human tech there. It was enough to make any self-respecting pirate drool. "I guess we're not the only ones with sticky fingers," Marnie observed, pointing at the human tech. "Never thought I'd see our tech here," Lena said. "Shows how unimaginative they are," Jax replied. "Stealing from us instead of inventing their own stuff. Imitation is the finest form of flattery," Finn said, smirking. "More like the laziest form," Jax countered. They reached the main storage room. Inside was everything they'd been hoping for. Weapons, tech, and enough Glorkin contraband to start a small war. "Santa's come early," Jax whispered, eyes wide. "Yeah, and with the naughty kids stealing the presents," Lena added. "Then let's not hang around for the reindeer," Jax said. "Grab what you can." They started shoveling the contraband into their bags, moving with the efficiency of people who knew they had minutes before everything went to hell. "I've got a bad feeling about this," Marnie said, her voice tense. "What gave it away? The death traps or our terrible luck?" Finn asked. "Both," Marnie replied. There was an ominous click and Jax's stomach dropped. He recognized the sound of a man about to have a very bad day. "Time to go," he shouted. As if on cue, the alarms blared to life, the depot flashing red like a nightclub with a murder problem. Guards poured in from all directions, and Jax knew they were well and truly screwed. "You had to say it, didn't you?" Lena shouted over the noise. "It's like you don't know me at all," Finn replied, ducking a laser blast. They ran, weaving through the depot as chaos erupted around them. Jax fired his blaster indiscriminately, aiming mostly for the air but occasionally hitting something useful. "I think we lost the element of surprise," Jax called back. "You don't say," Marnie replied, her sarcasm cutting through the noise. "Out through the north exit," Jax yelled, leading the way. They crashed through the depot, ducking and dodging as best they could. "This is going great," Finn said, his voice dripping with irony. "Define great," Jax shot back. They burst out into the open, the cool night air a sharp relief against the madness inside. Behind them, the depot was a cacophony of screeching alarms and angry alien shouts. "Now what?" Lena asked, her hands still itching for a fight. "Now," Jax said, "we run like hell." They sprinted away from the depot, their stolen goods bouncing awkwardly in their bags. The Glorkan guards were in hot pursuit, but Jax figured that was just another Tuesday. "Think they'll give up?" Finn asked. "Sure," Jax said, panting. "Right after they kill us." They reached their ship, the Rusty Nail, an aptly named bucket of bolts that somehow managed to stay in one piece. Marnie was already at the controls, flipping switches and praying to whatever deities listened to desperate engineers. "Get on," she shouted. The ramp closed just as the first shots hit the hull, the ship shuddering like a drunk on a bender. "Everyone strapped in," Jax yelled over the din. "Do you really care?" Finn asked. "Not really," Jax admitted, grinning. "Here we go." The Rusty Nail took off, the engines whining in protest but still delivering the necessary thrust. They shot into the sky, leaving the depot and its very angry occupants far behind. "Well, that was fun," Lena said, stretching out her arms. "Fun?" Jax asked. "I must have missed that part." "I think she means the not dying part," Finn suggested. "Oh, right," Jax said, nodding. That was definitely a highlight. The ship settled into a steady hum, the chaos of moments before fading into the background. They'd made it, by some miracle or cosmic joke. "What now?" Marnie asked from the pilot's seat. "Now," Jax said, leaning back, "we count our loot and see how much trouble we're in." "And if the Glorkans come after us?" Lena asked. "We do what we always do," Jax replied. "We improvise and hope stupidity saves the day." As they drifted into the void, Jax couldn't help but laugh. It was the laugh of a man who knew he was living on borrowed time, but was determined to make the most of it. To outsmarting the smart, he toasted, holding up an imaginary glass. His crew joined in, their laughter echoing through the ship. They were outlaws, fools, and damned lucky. But in a universe that often seemed intent on killing them in the most spectacular ways possible, they were also survivors. And that, as far as Jax was concerned, was something worth celebrating. Jack's tumbler stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting the collar of a jacket that had seen better days, or better centuries. "You know," he said, glancing at his reflection with a mix of disdain and irony, "if this was an acting gig, they'd tell me I've got the role of stupid human trader # 3 feet down pat." Marnie snorted, her nose buried in a manual filled with diagrams that looked like they were drawn by an over-caffeinated spider. "That's because you are the best at playing stupid, Jax." "Hey, it's not just stupid," Jax retorted, rolling his eyes. "It's convincingly stupid. There's a difference." "Yeah," Finn chimed in, fingers dancing over his wrist console with the grace of a drunk octopus. "One gets you shot, the other gets you shot faster." "Can we focus?" Lena interjected, flexing her arms as though she could wrestle her way through a misunderstanding. "I'm all for comedy, but I'd rather not end up as a Glorkan punchline." The Rusty Nail had docked with what could generously be called a thud. They were on the fringes of the Glorkan black market depot, slipping in under the guise of clueless traders. It was a plan Jax had cooked up after a few too many drinks and far too many close calls. The Glorkans loved underestimating humans, nearly as much as they loved their precious profits. Jax turned away from the mirror, adjusting his jacket with an exaggerated flourish. "All right, listen up. We stroll in like we've got nothing to hide, because technically, we don't. We're just here to trade." He used air quotes like they were going out of fashion. "Our job is to gather intel," Marnie reminded, snapping her manual shut. "We need the depot layout if we expect to grab anything worthwhile later." "Right," Jax said, his voice dripping with exaggerated confidence. "And if anyone asks questions, we just play dumb. Which shouldn't be hard for some of us," Finn muttered under his breath. Lena cracked her knuckles, a sound like someone stepping on a packet of dry noodles. "I'm ready to break something if it goes south." "That's the spirit," Jax said, trying to inject a note of optimism into his voice. "Let's see if we can walk back out of here with our skins intact." They disembarked, stepping into the depot's bustling market area. The air was filled with the scent of ozone and desperation, a combination that did little for Jax's already low opinion of alien bazaars. Stalls lined the walls, each hawking something more dubious than the last. Exotic weapons, questionable tech, and enough dodgy consumables to cause a universal food poisoning epidemic. Jax sauntered forward, doing his best impression of a man who wasn't worried about the galaxy's most paranoid aliens breathing down his neck. Lena played the silent, intimidating bodyguard, while Finn and Marnie did their best to look convincingly like tech-savvy traders with more credits than sense. "Remember," Jax whispered, keeping a smile plastered on his face, "act natural." "Define natural," Marnie shot back, eyeing a Glorcan merchant with skepticism. "For you, grumpy and technically critical. For Finn, socially maladjusted. For Lena, punchy. Punchy, I can do," Lena said, giving a mock salute. They ambled through the market, pretending to browse, all the while keeping an eye out for anything that might reveal the depot's layout. Glorcan guards roamed the area with the fluidity of wolves on a hunt, their eyes scanning for any hint of trouble. Jax felt their gazes like prickles on the back of his neck but pushed it aside. An ordinary trader wouldn't sweat under such scrutiny. "So, what's the plan if we get found out?" Finn asked, voice low enough to be lost in the din. "Run for your life and blame Jax," Marnie suggested. Jax sighed. "I knew I kept you around for your unwavering support." A particularly large Glorcan stepped into their path, arms crossed over a chest that resembled a wall of gristle and bad intentions. "What brings you here, humans?" he asked, voice like gravel in a blender. "Shopping," Jax replied smoothly, casting a wide, guileless grin. "We've heard there's no place better for cutting-edge tech." The Glorcan's eyes narrowed, suspicion evident in the twitch of his reptilian tail. "We don't often get human traders here." "That's because most humans aren't adventurous enough," Jax said, injecting a note of disappointment into his voice. "But we're different. We like to think outside the box, and sometimes inside your depot." The Glorcan grunted, apparently weighing the suspicious nature of humans against his disdain for unnecessary paperwork. "Stay out of trouble," he warned, stepping aside. "Wouldn't dream of it," Jax replied, waving cheerily as they moved past the guard. They continued through the market, the tension beneath the surface as palpable as the static in the air. Marnie nudged Jax, subtly pointing towards a map plastered on a wall behind a vendor selling cybernetic enhancements that looked like they'd been assembled by a particularly sadistic child. "That's our ticket," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax nodded. "Finn, get eyes on that and see if you can download it." "Piece of cake," Finn replied, already tapping away. His wrist console emitted a series of soft beeps, and he nodded. "Got it. Not that I'm saying this place is gloriously incompetent, but they're gloriously incompetent." "Let's not push our luck," Lena said, scanning their surroundings like a hawk. "We've got what we need, and the last thing I want is to end up on the wrong side of a Glorcan interrogation." "You mean there's a right side?" Jax quipped. They wove their way back towards the dock, doing their best to blend into the constant ebb and flow of the market. It seemed, for once, that their luck might actually hold out. That was, until Finn's wrist console let out a shrill beep, drawing the attention of every guard within earshot. "What the hell, Finn?" Jax hissed, eyes darting around as the guards began to close in. "Must be interference," Finn said, furiously tapping at the screen. "Or just my incredible luck." "Time to hustle," Jax said, motioning for the others to move. They picked up the pace, doing their best to look like traders in a hurry rather than thieves on the brink of exposure. "Stop," a guard barked, his voice cutting through the crowd like a laser through butter. "Play dumb," Jax muttered, turning with an expression of feigned innocence. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You've been flagged for suspicious activity," the guard said, his massive frame imposing even by Glorcan standards. Jax feigned shock, placing a hand over his heart as though the accusation had physically wounded him. "Suspicious? Us? We're just humble traders trying to make an honest living." The guard wasn't buying it, his hand inching towards the weapon at his hip. "You'll need to come with us for questioning." "Questioning?" Jax said, laughing nervously. "I love questions. I'm practically a quiz enthusiast." "Less talking, more walking," Lena murmured, her knuckles popping ominously. But the guard wasn't in the mood for subtle warnings or human idioms. He reached for Jax, intent on enforcing compliance by any means necessary. Jax stepped back, hands raised in surrender. All right, no need to get handsy. We'll come quietly." Marnie shot him a look that promised pain, but Jax ignored it. Sometimes, you had to play along until you could figure out how to cheat. They allowed themselves to be corralled by the guards, who seemed more interested in the appearance of authority than the reality of it. Jax filed that observation away for later, wondering if it might come in handy. As they were led towards a holding area, Jax leaned over to Finn. Any bright ideas? Finn grimaced, his fingers twitching like they were itching to crack a particularly juicy encryption. Give me a minute. We might not have a minute, Lena said, eyeing the guards with the kind of intensity that suggested she was calculating the odds of breaking their necks before they could raise an alarm. Plan B, Marnie said, voice low and steady. Which is? Jax asked. Improvise and hope stupidity saves the day, Finn suggested, repeating Jax's earlier quip with a hint of resignation. Jax grinned. Then let's give stupidity a fighting chance. As they neared the holding area, Jax feigned a stumble, crashing into Lena. She responded with a shove that propelled him into one of the guards. Chaos erupted like a dam breaking, and in the confusion, Finn's fingers flew over his console. A moment later, the lights flickered and alarms blared anew, creating a cacophony that drowned out shouted orders. Move, Jax shouted, shoving past the dazed guards. They barreled through the depot, weaving between startled shoppers and bewildered vendors. The guards were in disarray, scrambling to reassert control, but Jax and his team didn't wait around to see how that panned out. The rusty nail loomed ahead, a beacon of salvation in the chaos. They sprinted toward it, Finn already tapping into the ship's systems to initiate launch. Get us out of here, Marnie, Jax yelled as they piled aboard. You think I'm waiting for an invitation? She shot back, fingers flying over the controls. The ship roared to life, engines straining but obedient. They blasted away from the depot, leaving a trail of confusion and angry Glorkans in their wake. Jax slumped into his seat, heart racing as the adrenaline ebbed. Anyone got a tally of how many times we've cheated death this week? Lost count, Lena said, looking far too pleased with herself. Next time, someone remind me to install a quieter console, Finn grumbled. You mean there's going to be a next time? Marnie asked, raising an eyebrow. Jax chuckled, shaking his head. Of course there is. We're too stupid to quit. The galaxy might have been an unforgiving place, but as long as they had their wits and a healthy dose of recklessness, they'd manage. After all, stupidity wasn't just their secret weapon, it was their defining characteristic. The rusty nail was cruising through the inky depths of space, and Jax was nursing a headache the size of a small moon. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was a blissful contrast to the bedlam they'd just escaped. But peace had an irritating way of being temporary, much like a Glorkan's patience. So, what's the plan now? Finn asked, his eyes glued to his wrist console as if searching for divine inspiration from his flickering display. Jax sighed, rubbing his temples. Plan? We don't need no stinkin' plan. We improvise, remember, improvise, Marnie echoed, looking up from a manual filled with diagrams that made a star map look like a children's coloring book. That's just a fancy way of saying, wing it and hope for the best, isn't it? Yep, Jax replied cheerfully. And it's worked so far. As much as a leaky spacesuit, Lena grumbled from the corner, sharpening a blade with a focus that suggested she intended to use it soon, preferably on Jax's next brilliant idea. Their laughter was cut short by a harsh beep from Finn's console, an alarm that said, hey, guess what? The universe isn't done screwing with you yet. Guys, Finn said, a slight tremor in his voice that sent Jax's heart plunging towards his boots. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? Jax asked, already anticipating the answer. It was never anything good, like running out of bacon or someone losing a sock in the dryer. That kind, Finn said, pointing out the viewport. A shimmering barrier, as impenetrable as a tax auditor's heart, was stretching across the vastness of space. It was the kind of thing that screamed, you're not going anywhere, buddy, in fluorescent colors only Glorkans could love. Energy barrier, Marnie said, her voice flat. Never seen one that big before. Size isn't everything, Jax muttered, trying to ignore the rising panic in his chest. So, what do we do now? Hope it's a hologram, Lena suggested, though her tone was less hopeful and more, we're about to die. We could try knocking politely, Finn offered, tapping his console in a futile attempt to scan the thing. Or we crash into it and see what happens. All great options, Jax said, his mind whirling. But let's try something a bit more nuanced. Nuanced. Lena raised an eyebrow, her sarcasm cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. Coming from you, that means reckless and slightly suicidal, right? Not necessarily, Jax countered, though he couldn't blame them for the skepticism. In truth, Jax was busy rummaging through the cluttered storage compartment, a graveyard of outdated Earth tech. You'd be amazed at what passed for cutting edge back home. His hands closed around a dusty metal box, and he pulled it out with a triumphant grin. Behold, he declared, holding it up like a caveman discovering fire. A Walkman. Silence. Then, a what? Marnie asked, her expression baffled. It's an ancient music player, Jax explained, his voice smug. But more importantly, it emits electromagnetic signals. Lena snorted. And you think that'll help us? How? We scramble the barrier's signal with this, Jax explained, ignoring their incredulous stares. By playing some good old-fashioned rock music. This is your plan? Finn said, incredulity dripping from every word. A piece of text so outdated it makes us look like geniuses by comparison. Exactly, Jax said, undeterred. The Glorkans won't expect it. They underestimate Earth tech, thinking we're all still swinging in trees. Why not? Lena said, crossing her arms. We tried everything else. As Jax wired the Walkman into the ship's systems, a process akin to convincing a cat to take a bath, Marnie was eyeing the diagrams again. If this works, I'll eat this manual. Please don't, Finn said. We might need it later. With the Walkman hooked up, Jax slapped an old cassette into the player. He couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here goes nothing. The barrier loomed ever closer, and for a second, it felt like the entire universe held its breath. Jax hit play, and the cockpit was filled with the crackling strains of electric guitar and the wailing vocals of a long-dead rock star. To their collective astonishment, the barrier flickered. Once, twice, then, like a magic trick gone right, it died, leaving behind only the vast, open void of space. Holy shit, Finn breathed, eyes wide. It actually worked. Jax grinned, feeling the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for cats who had knocked something expensive off a shelf. Of course it did. Never doubt the power of classic rock. Just don't expect this to become a regular thing, Marnie said, though her eyes betrayed a glint of relief. I don't think we have enough cassettes to keep this up. Next time, we bring a boombox, Lena suggested, a grin twitching at the corners of her mouth. The rusty nail cruised through the now empty space, leaving the dead barrier, and their latest close call, behind. But Jax couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing on the horizon. The Glorkans wouldn't take this latest breach lightly, and they certainly wouldn't forget the humans who'd outsmarted them. All right, gang, Jax said, settling back into his seat. Next destination. Anywhere that isn't here, Finn said, already inputting coordinates. Got a feeling we'll be seeing more of our scaly friends soon, Lena added, checking her weaponry with an efficiency that said she was ready for whatever came next. Then let's make sure we're ready for them, Jax replied, feeling the weight of the universe settle back on his shoulders. They might have escaped by the skin of their teeth this time, but luck was like a cheap hovercar, unreliable when you needed it most. As the stars streaked by, Jax couldn't help but chuckle. Guess it's true what they say. And what's that? Marnie asked, packing away her manual with newfound respect. Earth tech, Jax said, patting the Walkman. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The ship hummed along, its crew a mismatched band of misfits and outlaws, bound together by shared insanity and a penchant for survival. Whatever came next, they'd face it the way they always did. With a grin, a quip, and maybe, just maybe, a plan that was as crazy as it was brilliant. To the next adventure, Jax toasted, holding up an imaginary glass. To insanity, Finn added, raising his wrist console in mock salute. And to surviving, Lena finished, her smile a little less sarcastic this time. In the vast, uncaring expanse of space, populated by hostile aliens and even deadlier friends, the rusty nail sped onward, its crew ready for whatever the universe threw their way. Because in a galaxy where the odds were never in their favor, they'd learned one unbreakable truth. Sometimes, you just had to rock on. The rusty nail's cockpit was quieter than a nun's confessional. The crew, still buzzing from their improbable escape, sat in silence. Jax, who normally had more ideas than common sense, was unusually contemplative. He'd discovered a new hobby. Staring at the abandoned depot layout sprawled across Marnie's console. New hobby? Lena asked, flicking a knife into the air with the kind of grace that suggested she could do it blindfolded. Trying to understand the enemy, Lena, Jax replied, rubbing his temples as if he could massage the information into his brain. It's like an art critic staring at a blank canvas. Except the canvas wants to kill you, Finn quipped, eyes still flicking between his console and the chaos they'd left behind. You know, they say ignorance is bliss, Marnie added, not looking up from her manual. But I guess you're too much of a masochist for that. Call it professional curiosity, Jax shrugged, scribbling some notes on a greasy napkin. Besides, someone needs to figure out how those scaly bastards' brains tick. Hope you brought a hammer and chisel, Lena said dryly. Finn snorted, I'd say start with profit over brains. That's their motto, right, because nothing says advanced alien race like corporate greed, Jax mused aloud. Makes me almost nostalgic for Earth. They underestimate us, Finn continued, eyes narrowing. Thinking we're just some backwater species clinging to outdated tech. Jax nodded, the gears in his mind whirring like an old Earth processor. And maybe that's where their weakness lies. Taking bets on whether you're about to get us killed or rich, Lena said. Both, probably, Jax replied, flashing a grin that was more bravado than confidence. Before anyone could dive further into the well of sarcasm, Finn's console beeped, reminding him that respite was a luxury they couldn't afford. Guys, we've got company. Jax looked up in alarm. What kind of company? The kind that comes with a whole lot of blasters aimed at your face, Finn said grimly. Glorkans, Marnie guessed, abandoning her manual for the more reliable reassurance of the ship's weapons systems. Bingo, Finn confirmed, gesturing to the screen where angry red blips multiplied like bad decisions at a bachelor party. Wonderful, Jax muttered. Looks like they've rolled out the welcome mat. Guess they didn't appreciate our little barrier trick, Lena said, strapping on her blaster with an enthusiasm only she could muster in the face of imminent doom. Well, time to make some new friends, Jax said, checking his own weaponry with a nonchalance he certainly didn't feel. As they prepared for a confrontation with the Glorkans, the rusty nails comms crackled to life with a voice that could make nails on a chalkboard sound like a lullaby. Unidentified vessel, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in termination. Friendly types, Lena remarked. Think they do children's parties? Jax opened the comms channel, adopting his best, hapless trader, voice, a tone he'd mastered through necessity. Oh, hey there, officers. Didn't see you guys there. We were just cruising by, enjoying the sights. The sights? Marnie mouthed, incredulous. Keep talking, Finn whispered, his fingers flying over his console as he attempted to identify any weak spots in the Glorkan fleet. That's right, Jax continued, laying it on thick. You know, stellar phenomena, black holes, energy barriers that look like they'll mess you up something fierce. You're in violation of multiple interstellar laws, the voice droned, seemingly impervious to Jax's charms. Prepare to be boarded. Bit of a stickler for the rules, aren't they? Jax muttered, cutting the transmission and turning to his crew. Ideas? We could always toss you out the airlock, Lena suggested, her grin sharp enough to cut glass. Tempting, but I'd rather keep all my limbs intact, Jax replied. Besides, I have a plan. That's what you said last time, Marnie pointed out. And look where we ended up. Trust me, Jax said, flashing what he hoped was a reassuring smile. I'm learning on the job. Lena sighed, clearly unconvinced but also clearly without a better idea. All right, Captain Chaos. What's the play? Finn, Jax said, gesturing to the console. How's the depot's security system look? Any chance we can piggyback a signal? Finn frowned, considering. It's a long shot, but if we can cause a feedback loop, we might just scramble their systems long enough to make a break for it. Great, Jax said. Do it. Meanwhile, Marnie and Lena, let's keep our guests entertained. Entertained how? Marnie asked. Jax grinned, reaching for the Walkman. More classic rock. Never thought I'd be saved by ancient music, Lena muttered, readying her weapons. As Finn worked his magic on the consoles, Jax fumbled with the cassette player, trying not to think too hard about their odds. It was either this, or hope the Glorkans had a sudden change of heart and decided to take up interpretive dance instead. The comms clicked again, Mr. Monotone's voice cutting through the hull. Final warning, surrender or be destroyed. All right, Finn, Jax said, fingers crossed for luck. Let's see what you've got. Finn hit the final key, and for a moment, nothing happened. The Glorkan ships loomed closer, and Jax's heart sank. Then, with a satisfying crackle, the depot's security system fired back, sending ripples through the void like a stone skipping across a pond. The Glorkan ships wobbled and blinked out of formation, chaos spreading like wildfire. Hell yeah, Lena whooped, a rare display of enthusiasm. Nice work, Finn, Jax said, relief flooding through him. Don't thank me yet, Finn warned. We've got a small window before they regroup. Jax didn't need to be told twice. He gunned the engines, the rusty nail responding with a groan that suggested it shared their reluctance to be anywhere near Glorkans. The ship shot forward, cutting through the disarray like a knife through warm butter. As they sped away, Jax couldn't help but laugh. It was a sound filled with disbelief, adrenaline, and the unshakable conviction that somehow, against all odds, they'd done it again. You know, he said over the noise, I think we just found our edge. What, sheer dumb luck? Lena quipped, still riding the high of their escape. No, Jax corrected, though he couldn't entirely deny it. Exploiting what they don't expect. Marnie arched an eyebrow. You mean stupidity? Exactly, Jax grinned. They think we're backward, clueless. We use that. Next time, we hit them where it hurts. And where's that? Finn asked, already anticipating the answer. Jax tapped the depot layout still shimmering on Marnie's console. Right here. We find a chink in their armor, and we exploit it. You really think there's a weakness there? Marnie asked, skepticism tinging her words. Every fortress has one, Jax said. And we're just crazy enough to find it. So, what's the plan? Lena asked, though her eyes gleamed with anticipation. Jack settled back in his seat, feeling that familiar thrill of the chase. We improvise, remember? Great, Marnie muttered, because that's worked so well for us before. Hey, we're still alive, aren't we? Jack shot back, unperturbed. For now, Finn added, though he wore a small smile. And sir, as the rusty nail hurtled towards the next uncertain horizon, its crew shared a quiet moment of camaraderie, united by their shared insanity and the stubborn belief that somewhere, somehow, they'd find a way to come out on top. But in the silent corners of his mind, Jax knew the Glorkans wouldn't let this stand. Not this time. Not after they'd been outmaneuvered by what they saw as nothing more than hairless apes with a penchant for destruction. The next move would have to be theirs, but the humans would be ready. At least, Jax hoped they would. To surviving, again, he toasted, raising his imaginary glass once more. To not dying horribly, Marnie added, with newfound respect for their shared madness. You know, I'm starting to like this job, Lena said, a rare softness in her voice. Don't worry, Finn grinned, I'm sure that'll pass soon. As the stars stretched out before them, Jax couldn't help but feel a strange sort of hope. For all their flaws and foolishness, they had something their enemies lacked: unpredictability. In a universe that seemed determined to squash them flat, they'd learned the ultimate truth. It wasn't brains or brawn that kept you alive. It was sheer, unadulterated audacity. And if the Glorkans wanted a war, well, they'd picked the wrong humans to mess with. The rusty nail hurtled through the void like a caffeinated comet, its engines roaring with the enthusiasm of a bar brawl on a Friday night. Jax leaned back in his chair, trying to look as though he had everything under control. In reality, he felt like a magician who'd run out of rabbits. Anyone else feel like their stomach's staging a mutiny? Lena asked, gripping the armrest as the ship rocked violently. It's either that or Finn's cooking again, Jax replied, flashing her a grin more hollow than a politician's promise. Hey, my cooking's not that bad, Finn protested, his eyes fixed on his wrist console as if he could will it to project better news. Tell that to the Glorkans, Marnie quipped, strapping herself in like someone who knew exactly how thin the line was between in control and explosive decompression. Yeah, well, I doubt charred synth spuds count as a war crime, Finn shot back, though his attention remained on the blips flickering threateningly closer on his screen. Maybe not, but they're still pretty deadly, Jax added, trying to keep the mood light despite the dire reality. The Glorkans were closing in, and fast. The comms crackled to life again, Mr. Monotone's voice as soothing as a dentist's drill. Unidentified vessel, surrender immediately. Escape is impossible. Sounds like they're getting desperate, Lena said, flicking her knife absent-mindedly. The blade danced between her fingers, a metallic blur that seemed to echo her restlessness. Desperate's good, Jax said, though he wasn't entirely sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. Desperate means they're worried, or just really eager to blast us into space debris, Finn muttered, tapping at his console with the kind of focus usually reserved for bomb diffusion. Finn's got a point, Marnie said, looking over at Jax. We've been running on luck and bluster. Sooner or later, one of those is gonna run out. Gotta agree with the manual guru here, Lena chimed in, her knife finally coming to a rest. We're not exactly equipped for a straight-up fight. Jax exhaled, feeling the weight of leadership like a boulder on his back. It was one thing to lead a crew into chaos, it was another to keep them alive in the aftermath. I know it looks bad, it's a full-blown shit show, Finn interrupted, his usual calm replaced by a thin veneer of sarcasm. Alright, point taken, Jax conceded. His mind raced, searching for any thread of a plan that didn't involve them becoming intimately acquainted with the business end of a Glorkan blaster. We could always turn back, Marnie suggested, though her tone was anything but hopeful. Find some corner of the galaxy they haven't heard of and lay low. And what, start a knitting club? Lena snorted, her disdain evident. We're in too deep to just run. To be fair, I'd suck at knitting, Finn admitted, his fingers still flying over the console. But it might be getting vaporized. Jax shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his lips. If we run, they'll see it as weakness. We'll be looking over our shoulders forever. At least we'd have heads to look over our shoulders with, Finn pointed out. Morbid and practical, Marnie said, her voice tinged with sardonic approval. The man's got a point. Morbid and practical have kept us alive this long, Jax countered. But we stick to the plan. We find their weakness, and we hit it hard. The same plan that's got us a red carpet welcome from the Glorkans. Lena asked, skepticism sheathed in her words like the blade at her side. Look, I know it's risky. Risky is tossing dice in a back alley, Finn cut in. This is more like juggling plasma grenades. Whatever it is, Jack said, feeling his resolve harden like steel under pressure, it's what we've got. And unless someone's got a better idea, we stick with it. Silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. The kind that made you realize just how thin the hole was between you and the void. Then Lena chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. Fine, but if this goes south, I want it on record that I said, I told you so. Duly noted, Jack said, a wry grin breaking through. Let's just make sure we're alive to hear it. Right, Finn said, finally looking up from his console. If we're gonna do this, we need to move. The depot's got a weak spot in the eastern quadrant. Hit that, and we might just scramble their defenses. Just, Marnie asked, arching an eyebrow. I'd say it's a 50-50 shot, Finn admitted, shrugging as if those odds were worth betting your life on. But that's better than nothing. Better than Finn's cooking, at least, Lena quipped, standing and checking her blaster with casual efficiency. Everyone's a critic, Finn grumbled, though he didn't dispute the point. All right, let's do this, Jack said, feeling the adrenaline start to pump. Marnie, you're with me on the guns. Lena, cover our backs. Finn, keep us updated. We're going in hot. As the rusty nail veered toward the depot, the ship's engines howled in protest. Jax couldn't help but think it was a fitting soundtrack for their mad dash toward destiny, like a rock concert in the middle of a hurricane. Here we go, Marnie said, her fingers dancing across the ship's weapon systems. Let's give them one hell of a show. Really hope this isn't the encore, Lena muttered, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. It wasn't a question of if, but when. Jax took a deep breath, the weight of leadership resting heavy on his shoulders. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and largely out of their minds. But they also had something the Glorkans didn't, nothing to lose. Glorkan ships closing in, Finn reported, his calm demeanor doing little to mask the tension in his voice. They've got us in their sights. Then let's make sure it's the last thing they see, Jax replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. The rusty nail surged forward, a battered bullet tearing through space. The depot loomed ahead, an ugly, sprawling mess of metal and greed. Jax could feel the fear clawing at his insides, but he shoved it down. There was no room for second guessing now. If we're gonna die, let's at least go down swinging, Marnie said, a fierce, defiant light in her eyes. Speak for yourself, Finn muttered. I'd rather live to gloat about it later. Shut up and shoot, Lena said, a feral grin stretching across her face as the first Glorkan ship came into range. The rusty nail's weapons flared to life, spitting fire and fury at their pursuers. The Glorkans responded in kind, their own cannons lighting up the darkness with deadly intent. Evasive maneuvers, Jax ordered, gripping the controls like they were his lifeline. The ship bucked and weaved, a drunken dancer in a deadly ballet. Shields down to 40%, Finn warned, his voice tight with focus. Then let's make it count, Jax said, steering the ship toward the depot with reckless abandon. Gotta say, I'm kinda proud of us, Lena remarked, her tone light despite the chaos. We're like underdogs on steroids. Yeah, well, let's hope the Glorkans are allergic, Marnie replied, unleashing another volley of firepower. The depot loomed closer, its defense systems scrambling to respond to the unexpected assault. Jax felt a surge of grim satisfaction at the sight. They'd caught the bastards off guard, and that was the first step toward victory. Almost there, Finn said, his voice a thread of steel in the storm. Just a little more. The rusty nail screamed through space, the depot a looming shadow against the stars. Jax could almost taste the tension in the air, thick like static before a lightning strike. Get ready, he warned, his heart pounding like a war drum. This is it. The ship plunged into the depot's defenses like a knife into flesh, a brutal, decisive strike. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and the Glorkans scrambled to respond. But it was too late. They'd breached the perimeter. How's that for improvisation? Jax crowed, adrenaline making him giddy. Don't get cocky, Marnie warned, though she couldn't hide the hint of pride in her voice. We're not out of the woods yet. No, but we're close, Finn said, the tension in his posture easing slightly. We've got a shot. A shot's all we need, Lena said, her eyes gleaming with determination. Let's finish this. The rusty nail roared toward the depot's heart, a living embodiment of human audacity. They were battered, bruised, and on the verge of madness, but they were still standing. And in the cold, indifferent vastness of space, that counted for something. The Glorkans might have thought them predictable, easy prey, but they'd underestimated the stubborn, reckless spirit that drove these humans forward. The spirit that refused to back down, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Jax felt a fierce pride swell within him, a defiant flame that refused to be extinguished. They were here, they were alive, and they were fighting. And for now, that was enough. Let's give these bastards something to remember us by, he said, his voice a battle cry in the darkness. Here's to not dying today, Marnie replied, her hands steady on the controls. To making it count, Lena added, her knife a gleaming promise of what was to come. To proving him wrong, Finn finished, his eyes alight with the fire of battle. As the rusty nail plunged into the depot, Jax knew one thing for certain: they were far from finished. This was only the beginning, and against all odds, they were ready. In the depths of space, where hope was a fragile, flickering thing, they'd learned the ultimate lesson: never underestimate a human with nothing left to lose. The rusty nail hurtled through space with all the grace of a drunk pigeon, its engines coughing like a lifetime smoker. Jack's tumbler sat in the captain's chair, staring at the depot looming on the screen. A sprawling mass of metal and bad decisions, it was as welcoming as a haunted house at midnight. What's the plan, fearless leader? Marnie asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm like honey from a busted jar. Plan, Jax echoed, rubbing his jaw as if he could massage a strategy from the stubble. I'm thinking we bank on the Glorkan's most reliable trait: massive egos and minimal brainpower, Finn suggested, not looking up from his wrist console, where he was probably playing Space Solitaire instead of tracking their imminent doom. Exactly, Jax grinned. They think we're idiots, right? So let's give them idiots. You mean, act like idiots? Lena asked, her fingers still fondling the knife as if it were a comforting pet. That's really going out on a limb there, Jax. More like climb up the stupid tree and hit every branch on the way down, Jax replied, his grin widening. We make them think we're doing something dumb, something they can't resist stepping into, correct? Sounds like every Glorkan meeting I've ever dodged, Marnie said with a snort. We create a diversion, Jax continued, warming to his idea. A big, shiny, stupid diversion. We need them thinking we're more lost than a tourist in a black hole. Well, we're halfway there, Finn muttered, tapping a few keys with exaggerated care. So, what's the bait? Lena asked, arching a brow. We'll do something ridiculous, like pretending our ship's broken down, Jax said, snapping his fingers. They'll come in thinking they're about to collect some easy salvage. Meanwhile, we slip in and hit them where it counts. In the wallet? Marnie asked, because there wasn't anything a Glorkan held dearer than their credits. Exactly, Jax nodded. They love their money more than they hate us, which is saying something. Great, so we fake a breakdown, Lena said, rolling her eyes. And how do we make that believable? The rusty nail practically does it for us, Jax said, patting the console affectionately. Just a few tweaks make her groan a little more than usual. She already sounds like she's dying, Finn pointed out. Perfect, Jax said. This is where your questionable cooking comes in, Finn. My what now? Finn asked, finally pulling his attention from his console. We rigged the engines to let out a smokescreen of your famous burnt protein stew aroma, Jax said, stifling a chuckle. They'll think we're overloading, ready to blow. Finn blinked, then nodded slowly. You want smoke? You'll get smoke. Might even come with a side of nausea. See, who says your cooking doesn't have its uses? Lena smirked. We all do, frequently, Marnie added, her eyes twinkling with mischief. All right, Finn said, throwing his hands up. I'll tinker with the settings. But if the ship ends up smelling like a burnt-out kitchen, that's on you. Deal, Jax said. Marnie, get ready on the guns. We need to look helpless but not completely dead in the water. Playing possum. Got it, Marnie nodded. Though this possum's packing heat. And Lena, Jax turned to her, keep an eye on our tails. If anyone gets too curious, remind them why humans are often underestimated. I'll let my knife do the talking, Lena replied, her smile all teeth. Right, let's show them what human ingenuity looks like, Jax said, settling back in his chair with a confidence that felt more like bravado. And if it doesn't work, we can always try Finn's original suggestion and run a knitting club. Shut up, Jax, Finn grumbled, already tapping away at the console. The rusty nail slowed to a crawl, its engines sputtering like a cat with a hairball. Black smoke poured from one side, carrying the unmistakable scent of culinary catastrophe. In the cold dark of space, the ship looked like a wounded animal, ripe for the picking. They're biting, Finn announced, eyes glued to the radar. 2 ships breaking formation, heading our way. Glorkans are nothing if not predictable, Marnie said, rolling her eyes. Like flies to a bug zapper. Let's just hope we're not the ones getting zapped, Jax said, drumming his fingers on the armrest. Everybody ready? As ready as we'll ever be to play dead, Lena said, her fingers tapping a rhythm against her blade. The Glorkan ships approached, their sleek forms cutting through space like predatory fish. They darted around the rusty nail, cautious but intrigued, like cats with a new toy. Should I power up the guns? Marnie asked, fingers twitching over the controls. Not yet, Jax said. Let them come in close. We need them greedy and overconfident. Just like my last date, Lena said with a wicked grin. The Glorkin ships moved in, ready to board and claim their prize. They clamped onto the rusty nail with a metallic clunk that reverberated through the hull. Showtime, Jax whispered, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Finn activated the secondary systems, causing a series of hisses and pops throughout the ship. The Glorkins would hear those sounds and think the rusty nail was falling apart at the seams. The perfect illusion of incompetence. All right, give them a taste of human hospitality, Jax commanded, nodding at Marnie. The ship shuddered as Marnie unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, targeting the Glorkin ship's engines. The surprise attack caught them off guard, the Glorkins scrambling to counter the unexpected assault. Didn't expect that, did you? Finn muttered, fingers dancing over the console. Looks like they're struggling to keep up, Lena observed, watching the chaos unfold. Guess they didn't read the fine print on human stupidity. More like they didn't expect us to be this kind of stupid, Jax said, a fierce grin on his face. All right, let's move before they recover. The rusty nail shook off the Glorkin ships, breaking free with a defiant roar. Marnie kept firing, covering their retreat as they maneuvered toward the depot's now exposed weak spot. We're in, Finn said, a note of triumph in his voice. Their defenses are down, just like we planned. Let's finish this before they realize what hit them, Jax said, steering the rusty nail toward the heart of the depot. The ship weaved through the structure, a metal labyrinth of greed and poor architectural choices. They sped through corridors, dodging debris and sluggish Glorkin response teams, who were still reeling from the unexpected assault. How many credits you think they've got stashed away in here? Lena asked, eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Enough to make this whole mess worth it, Jax replied, determination etched on his face. As they neared the central vault, an alarm blared, a shrill sound that reverberated through the hull. The Glorkins were finally catching up, but it was too late. Vault's just ahead, Finn said, his voice tight with concentration. Let's hit it and scram, Marnie said, her fingers itching for action. They breached the vault, the doors parting with a reluctant hiss. Inside was wealth beyond imagination, a veritable dragon's hoard of treasures and technology. More than enough to give them a fighting chance in this unforgiving galaxy. Now that's a payday, Lena said, eyeing the loot with undisguised glee. Let's pack it up, Jax said, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. We don't have much time. They worked fast, loading the rusty nail with as much as they could carry. Every second felt like an hour, the tension a palpable force pressing down on them. All right, we're good, Finn said, securing the last of the crates. Then let's get the hell out of Dodge, Jax said, guiding the rusty nail out of the depot as the Glorkins scrambled to respond. The ship rocketed away, engines flaring with renewed vigor. Behind them, the depot was a maelstrom of confusion and anger, but they were free, the wealth of the Glorkins' arrogance in their hold. We did it, Marnie said, disbelief coloring her voice. We actually did it. I never doubted us for a second, Lena said, though the grin on her face betrayed the truth. Speak for yourself, Finn said, shaking his head. I was about ready to start knitting. But you didn't, and that's what matters, Jax said, a triumphant gleam in his eye. We turned their own arrogance against them, and now we've got what we need. A ship full of loot and a head full of crazy, Marnie said, shaking her head. Not bad for a day's work. Here's hoping we can keep it up, Lena replied, her knife twirling in her fingers. Jax leaned back in his chair, feeling something suspiciously like satisfaction. They'd pulled it off against all odds, and for now, that was enough. Let's find a quiet corner of the galaxy, Jax said, a contented sigh escaping his lips. At least until the next harebrained scheme. Sounds good to me, Finn said, finally looking up from his console. And maybe I can try some less explosive recipes. And I'll sharpen my knitting skills, Marnie said, laughter in her voice. As the rusty nail sped away from the depot, leaving chaos in its wake, Jax knew they'd just proven something important. In a universe that thrived on underestimating humans, sometimes being underappreciated was the best advantage you could have. The rusty nail was a patchwork heap of metal that shouldn't have been able to fly, let alone pull off a heist under the noses of the Glorkins. Yet here they were, speeding away with a haul that could buy each of them a vacation on a luxury moon, if they lived long enough to spend it. Status, Finn, Jax snapped, his eyes flicking between the viewport and the console. The rusty nail groaned like an old dog stretching after a nap, but she was holding together. For now, engines are holding, just about. I'd say we've got enough juice to outrun a particularly determined snail, Finn replied, his fingers dancing over the controls like a concert pianist who'd decided that music was a waste of talent. Not exactly confidence-inspiring, Lena murmured, her knife spinning between her fingers. It was a wonder she hadn't nicked herself, but it was probably more scared of her than she was of it. Confidence is for people with a death wish, Marnie chimed in, eyes fixed on the radar. I'd settle for luck at this point. Luck is for gamblers, Jax retorted, steering the ship with a grace that belied its clunky design. We're just making educated guesses. Educated? In this crew? Lena raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. That's a stretch. Jax smirked, the barest hint of a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. I'm a firm believer in learning from mistakes. Just that they're usually someone else's. The Glorkans had underestimated them, which was their first mistake. Assuming that humans would stick to predictable plans was their second. But Jax knew better. Humans were unpredictable, and that made them dangerous. And if there was one thing Jax loved more than a good plan, it was a plan that made everyone else look stupid. So what's the plan now, Captain? Finn asked, still tapping at his wrist console, probably playing another round of Space Solitaire. We make sure those Glorkans regret ever crossing paths with us, Jax replied, leaning back in his chair as if he hadn't a care in the world. We've still got a few tricks up our sleeves. Like what? Marnie asked, her finger hovering over the trigger controls like they were the last piece of chocolate in the universe. Ever heard of the Trojan horse? We're going to give it a little sci-fi spin. Which is? Lena prodded, curiosity getting the better of her cynicism. We let them think they've got their hands on a prize, then blow it up in their faces, Jax explained, his voice all business. And how exactly do we do that? Finn questioned, still half distracted by his game. You remember that experimental tech we picked up a few jobs back? The one that makes things go boom in a rather spectacular fashion. Finn nodded slowly, now paying full attention. You mean the one you said we'd never need unless we were really desperate? Yeah, that one. Desperate times, desperate measures, Marnie muttered, her fingers twitching over the controls. Exactly. We plant it on a decoy ship, make it look like it's loaded with the goods, and let them take the bait, Jax continued, the gleam in his eye suggesting he was enjoying this a bit too much. Like a space piñata, Lena said, her lips curving into a wicked smile. Except instead of candy, they get a face full of explosion. That's the idea, Jax confirmed. We'll send them running with their tails between their legs. Glorkans have tails? Finn asked, brow furrowed. It's a figure of speech, Finn, Jax sighed. Really, you should try reading something other than the back of your cereal box. The crew got to work, each member a cog in the well-oiled machine that, more often than not, sputtered and clanked but got the job done. The decoy ship was prepped and loaded with the explosive tech, ready to put on the performance of a lifetime. All set, Marnie said, her fingers poised over the launch button. Want me to do the honors? Be my guest, Jax replied, settling back into his seat. Let's see how the Glorkans handle a little human ingenuity. With a flick of her finger, Marnie sent the decoy ship hurtling through space, a missile wrapped in the facade of opportunity. It broadcast a distress signal, a plea for help that practically screamed, "Look at me, I'm valuable." Now we wait, Lena said, her eyes fixed on the viewport. Silence stretched, the kind that buzzed with potential energy. Jax couldn't help but tap his fingers against his thigh, a nervous habit he'd never quite kicked. Think they'll fall for it? Finn asked, breaking the quiet. The Glorkans, Marnie said with a snort. If it shines and says, money, they'll bite. True to their expectations, a Glorkan ship darted out of nowhere, sleek and predatory, making a beeline for the decoy. Hook, line, and sinker, Jax murmured, a satisfied grin on his face. The Glorkans latched onto the decoy, their ship an arrogant vulture come to pick at the bones of what they thought was easy prey. The crew watched, breath held, as the Glorkans towed the decoy back toward their main fleet. Wait for it, Jax whispered, his voice a thread of tension. The decoy ship docked, disappearing into the belly of the Glorkan vessel. For a heartbeat, all was still. Then the universe went white. A blossom of fire and force that rippled through the Glorkan ship, tearing it asunder with an elegance that was almost artistic. The crew of the Rusty Nail watched as their handiwork reduced the Glorkan arrogance to space dust. Well, that's one way to make an impression, Lena said, her voice carrying a note of admiration. Think they'll remember us now? Finn asked, his eyes wide with awe. Only if they've got a good insurance policy, Jax replied, his tone light. If not, they'll just be another cautionary tale. The Glorkan fleet, now short one ship, scrambled in disarray. Panic spread among them like a virus, their ranks collapsing into chaos. We've bought ourselves some time, Marnie said, her fingers finally relaxing from the controls. Time to make a clean getaway, Jax agreed, guiding the Rusty Nail into the safety of the asteroid belt. Let's hope they've learned a lesson. About underestimating humans? Lena asked, a playful lilt to her voice. That, and the dangers of greed, Jax answered, settling into his seat with a contented sigh. But mostly, that if you're going to step on us, you'd better be prepared for when we step back. The rusty nail plunged into the asteroid belt, finding cover among the floating rocks and debris. The Glorkans, now too busy dealing with their self-inflicted mess, were left in the dust, licking their wounds and counting their losses. Looks like we've got ourselves a little breathing room, Marnie said, her voice light with relief. And a story to tell, Finn added, shaking his head in disbelief. Let's just hope it's one we can laugh about later, Jax said, though the grin on his face suggested he was already doing just that. Lena chuckled, twirling her knife with casual expertise. If nothing else, it'll make one hell of a bar tale. As the rusty nail sailed through the asteroid belt, the crew allowed themselves a moment of triumph. They'd outsmarted the Glorkans, danced with danger, and lived to tell the tale. In a universe that dismissed humans as little more than an inconvenience, they'd proven that there was more to them than met the eye. And as far as Jax was concerned, that was worth more than all the credits in the galaxy. The rusty nail coasted through the asteroid belt, each of Jax's crew members basking in the afterglow of their most recent caper. It wasn't every day that you outwitted an entire fleet of Glorkans. They had gambled big and won bigger, though the celebration was tempered by the reality that they weren't out of the woods just yet. Think they're still out there licking their wounds? Marnie asked, peering over her radar console with the bemusement of someone watching ants scurry about after you've kicked their hill. If they've got any sense, they'll be in full retreat, Jax replied, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in his voice. But since the Glorkans, there's a good chance they're still scratching their heads and wondering what hit them. Lena snorted softly, twirling her knife in a manner that was both impressive and mildly terrifying. Bet they're still trying to figure out what a Trojan horse even means. Probably think it's a new kind of space pony. They're not the fastest ships in the fleet, that's for sure, Finn added, his eyes glued to his wrist console. For once, he wasn't absorbed in a game of space solitaire. I guess they're regrouping. Ego's too big to let it slide without a comeback attempt. Jax nodded, steering the ship with the ease of a man who knew every squeak and rattle by heart. We need to keep our edge. Make sure that they don't catch us with our pants down. Speaking of which, what's the plan with the new haul? Marnie asked, a glint of mischief in her eye. We gonna buy matching space yachts, or what? Tempting, Jax said, his lips curling into a half smile. But I was thinking we might put it to better use. Better than a space yacht. You feeling okay, Captain? Finn quipped, though the twinkle in his eye said he knew where Jax was going with this. Jax leaned back in his chair, stretching with the nonchalance of a cat that's just eaten the canary. Humans aren't exactly top of the food chain in this galaxy. We could use a little boost. And it seems like the Glorkans have kindly donated some tech to the cause. Redistribution of wealth. Robin Hood in space, Lena said, flicking her knife with the casual grace of a circus performer. I can get behind that. About time we even the odds a bit, Marnie agreed, tapping at her console. The depot's got enough tech to make a real difference. Not all of it's useful, but I'm sure there's something in there that'll tickle our fancy. The Glorkans might come back for their toys, Finn pointed out, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the console. They're not exactly the forgiving type. Let them, Jax said with a shrug. We'll be long gone by then. Besides, it's not like they can complain to the authorities without admitting they had a black market depot in the first place. Good point, Lena said, nodding appreciatively. Nothing like using someone's pride against them. The rusty nail glided into position, docking with the depot that had become their temporary treasure trove. The place was still a sprawling mass of metal and bad decisions, but now it was their sprawling mass of metal and bad decisions. Let's see what we've got, Jax said, leading the way into the depot's dimly lit corridors. The place felt like a ghost ship, echoes of hurried footsteps and whispered deals lingering in the air. Marnie was the first to break the silence, her voice echoing off the metallic walls. This might be the most organized chaos I've ever seen. And I once saw a Glorkan wedding. It's amazing what you can do with a little neglect and a lot of greed, Finn said, eyeing the stacks of crates like a kid in a candy store. Wonder how much of this is actually functional. That's the beauty of it, Jax said, prying open a crate with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. We don't need all of it to work. Just enough to give us an edge. Reckon we should test some of it out? Lena asked, her tone more curious than cautious. If by test you mean blow something up, then yes, Jax replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. We're sitting on a veritable buffet of explosive potential. Marnie chuckled, sifting through the contents of a nearby crate. Who knew the Glorkans were such generous benefactors? Generous, Finn snorted. They're about as generous as a starving cat with a mouse. Which is why it's so much fun to take what they think is theirs, Lena added, her knife now serving as a makeshift crowbar. The crew worked their way through the depot, claiming anything that looked remotely useful. There were weapons, tools, and a few pieces of tech that defied immediate categorization. Jack set aside a particularly sleek-looking device, a satisfied smirk on his face. This baby right here could revolutionize navigation systems. Or at least make it slightly less of a headache, he said, patting the device with the affection of a parent admiring their child's first science fair project. I'll believe it when I see it, Marnie said with a skeptical raise of her eyebrow. Everything looks shiny and new until it breaks down on you in the middle of a firefight. Then it's a good thing our job is to get it somewhere safe before anyone realizes it's gone, Jax replied, the confidence in his voice a balm against the uncertainty that laced their every move. With their haul secured, the crew of the Rusty Nail made their way back to the ship. The depot had been a goldmine, and they'd walked away with enough technology to give humanity a much-needed boost. Think this'll make a difference? Lena asked, her voice low enough that it might have been drowned out by the hum of the engines if Jax hadn't been listening closely. It's a start, Jax said, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. Maybe not enough to change the galaxy overnight, but enough to remind the universe that we're not to be underestimated. And what about us? Finn asked, his eyes following a distant comet as it streaked across the void. Where do we fit into all of this? Jax considered this for a moment, the weight of leadership pressing on his shoulders. We keep doing what we're doing. Pushing the boundaries, making noise, showing the galaxy that humans aren't just here to play by someone else's rules. Sounds good to me, Marnie said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. As long as we're not doing it for free. Trust me, Marnie, Jax replied with a grin. There's always profit in chaos. The Rusty Nail powered up, leaving the depot behind as they set a course for the nearest human outpost. They'd made a dent in the Glorkans' arrogance, stolen their tech, and lived to tell the tale. It was a good day to be human. Think they'll come after us again? Lena asked, her hand resting idly on her knife. They might, Jax admitted, steering the ship with a careful hand. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today, we celebrate. And by celebrate, you mean? Finn began, a hopeful note in his voice. Land, offload our haul, and maybe find a bar that serves something stronger than engine coolant, Jax replied, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Though the way this ship's been running, I wouldn't mind a bit of that either. The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the cockpit like music. Despite the odds, despite the dangers, they'd made it through another impossible situation intact. It was a testament to their resilience, their ingenuity, and their refusal to back down in the face of overwhelming odds. As the Rusty Nail sailed through the vast, unending sea of stars, Jax couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his crew. They were more than just a motley collection of misfits and outcasts, they were a family. A dysfunctional, argumentative, and occasionally combustible family, but a family nonetheless. They'd shown the galaxy that humans weren't just another species to be brushed aside. They were clever, resourceful, and more than willing to play dirty when the situation called for it. And as long as Jax had any say in the matter, that wasn't going to change anytime soon. Here's to the underdogs, Jax said, raising an imaginary glass. May they always keep the big dogs on their toes. Here, Lena agreed, her voice a warm echo of Jax's sentiment. Marnie raised her own invisible toast. To making the galaxy a bit more interesting, one heist at a time. And to surviving long enough to spend our credits, Finn added with a grin, his eyes twinkling with mischief. The Rusty Nail continued its journey, a lone ship carving its path through the stars. In the great, indifferent expanse of space, they were a small force for change, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. As they sailed toward their next adventure, Jax couldn't help but chuckle. In a universe where everyone seemed to underestimate humans, he took comfort in knowing that they still had a few surprises up their sleeves. After all, as any good gambler would tell you, the secret to winning wasn't just having the best cards, it was knowing how to play the hand you were dealt. And Jax, it seemed, had become quite the master at that game.